We have a little bit of a larger facility today, which is good for a room, but maybe bad for acoustics. So I hope you'll be able to hear. Again, we are seemingly in a topic without end, because indeed this is a very, very extensive topic. The issue of reproduction, the issue of Urevu. And if you remember, the last area we've been dealing with for the past 2 weeks was the issue which is both relevant for artificial insemination and for IVF, because you can have artificial insemination which goes straight into the woman's body, and then you can have artificial insemination with IVF, is the big machlokes Rav Moshe Feinstein and the Satmar Rebbe. If a woman that is inseminated by sperm from a man other than her husband, once again, according to the Satmar Rebbe's position, that is adultery. The woman is forbidden to stay with her husband. The child is a child of adultery, which means the child is a mamzer. Rav Moshe Feinstein took the position that adultery requires actual sexual intercourse, as does mamzerut, and therefore Rav Moshe argued that this is neither adultery, nor is the child a mamzer. Now, the last point, I'm not sure it's the very last point, but the point that was made was that the poskim in Eretz Yisrael kind of split the difference. They say if a woman's egg is fertilized via a donor sperm or via any artificial insemination of donor, whether it's IVF or directly in her body, lo mishaneh, we do not treat it like adultery, like Rav Moshe, but we are choshesh lechumra for a possibility of mamzeret. This is the position of the Rabbinut as well. Thus, for example, choshesh means, well, is or isn't means that we have to treat it like it's a halachic doubt, and we want to avoid the situation that we treat it as a possibility of mamzeret, and therefore one should avoid it. I'll give you a concrete example of how that would play out. The Rabbanut's rules, for example, regarding surrogate mothers. So again, in the case of a surrogate mother, there is a fertilization. Well, again, there are two types of surrogates, and let me briefly address both of them. One type of surrogate, which is not commonly used, is actually a full surrogate. By a full surrogate, we mean that let's assume you have a husband and a wife, and the wife cannot ovulate or doesn't ovulate, and she doesn't have a womb. She had a hysterectomy. So under those circumstances, both the egg and the incubator have to be a third party. So in a case like this, how would full surrogacy work? Husband's sperm fertilizes surrogate's egg, which is then transferred to surrogate's body for 9 months. She is both the egg donor and the surrogate. We'll call that full surrogacy. Now, that's not the way it usually works, but there is such a thing as full surrogacy. Gestational surrogacy is the more common scenario, where husband's sperm fertilizes wife's egg in vitro, and the embryo is transferred to a gestational surrogate who carries the baby for 9 months and, pursuant to a contract, agrees to deliver the baby to the couple. Obviously, things can break down, but this is what it is. Now, the Rabbanut, so under Israeli law, there is such a thing. Israeli law permits the use of both types of surrogate mothers. It is legal in Israel. It's called Aim Pundakait, which literally means the innkeeping mother, the mother that simply is the innkeeper for the baby. However, the Rabbanut has issued guidelines for surrogates, and the Rabbanut has the following requirements. Halachically, now again, these are not required by Israeli law, but under the Rabbanut's guidelines, these are the halachic requirements. Number one, the surrogate must be a single woman. She cannot be a married woman. Number two, the surrogate cannot be related to the husband in a manner that would be halachically incestuous. So again, the problem here is a problem of mamzer. Let me give you concrete examples. If the surrogate is married, the Rabbanut is choshesh for exactly what the Satmar Rebbe said, that if the husband's sperm impregnates another married woman, even via surrogacy, the child might be a mamzer. That's why she has to be single, to avoid a mamzerut problem. Like Rav Moshe Feinstein, there wouldn't have been a mamzerut problem, right? Because there was no sexual intercourse. That's what I mean to say. The Rabbanut tries to be machmir on the mamzer issue. Similarly, even if the surrogate is single, if the surrogate has a certain relationship, for example, it is very common in the secular world that a sister will be a surrogate for a sister. Right? A sister might agree to carry her sister's baby. It's a very common surrogate arrangement, to the degree surrogacy is common, which is not that common. Now, according to the Torah, even though the Torah does permit male polygamy is mutter d'oraisa, it is only the ban of Rabbeinu Gershom, but the Torah does prohibit having relations with your wife's sister. That's called achot isha. And if one were to have a child from achot isha, let's say by intercourse, that would be a mamzer. So the Rabbanut therefore says, you can't use your wife's sister as a surrogate, and you can't use the husband's, well, same reason, the husband can't have relations with, in other words, anything that if there would be relations, there would be mamzer, you can't use as a surrogate. So you can't use a married woman as a surrogate. You cannot use wife's sister as surrogate. You cannot use husband's sister as surrogate. You could not use husband or wife's mother as surrogate. Right? There are cases where young mothers, mothers who are young, have actually been surrogates for their daughters. Now that, of course, creates a tremendous confusion. I'll get to that. What's the relationship of a baby? Is the baby the granddaughter of the surrogate or the daughter of the surrogate? Is the baby the daughter of the wife, or is the baby the niece? The niece of no, the sibling of the wife, because born from the same mother. Very, very confusing, but nevertheless, the Rabbanut would not allow that because of the chashash of mamzer. That's what I mean to say, that the Rabbanut is choshesh. The Rabbanut is machmir for Rav Moshe Feinstein's reasoning. I'm sorry, not for the Satmar Rebbe's reasoning, that there may be an issue of mamzer here, and that's why the surrogate must be single. The surrogate cannot be a sister of husband or wife, and the surrogate cannot be a mother of husband or wife, simply because in either of those cases, the child might be a mamzer. Right? If a man has relations with his mother-in-law, that's mamzerut. If a man has relations with his mother, that's mamzerut. And even though this is not sexual relations, this is simply IVF followed by surrogacy, but since the child is generated from a halachically incestuous union, the Rabbanut's guidelines are to treat it as a suffix, a halachic doubt, whether the child is a mamzer.
I didn't have any children in Israel, but I'm just curious. You don't register children with the Rabbanut when you have a baby in Israel.
Yeah.
There's some connection to the Rabbanut.
Yeah. So surrogacies do have to be registered. That's exactly right. There are special rules that children that are born from surrogates, there are registration procedures. And with the Rabbanut, I'm saying the Rabbanut does require registration. Yeah.
I think last time you may have said that under the chuppah, when the boy opens the locket.
Yeah, I told you the story. Yeah.
For a mamzer, there was a locket from his mother who was not alive.
Yeah.
And Rav Moshe took the note and he crumpled it and he put it in his cup, and that was the end of that. They just went on with the ceremony.
That's correct. Yeah.
And what my question is, whether or the mamzering issue, the reason that I think you said was because there were not two witnesses. I think that's why he.
Yeah. So let me just explain a little bit of background there. Those of you that, if any of you go to Daf Yomi, I know one person who goes to Daf Yomi. This was actually discussed in the Daf Yomi around maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. That there is normally, in order to establish prohibited status, that a Jew is a mamzer or whatever it is, you normally do need two witnesses. But there is a gezeirat hakatov, a special scriptural dispensation, that a father has ne'emanus to disqualify his son. So if a father were to come forward and say, I had I had my son through my affair with a married woman, he would be believed to make his son a mamzer, even though he's only one person. This is a special koach of the father. And Rav Moshe's argument is that based on the sources, it only applies to the father and not the mother. So the mother is the same as any one witness, and normally you would need two witnesses to establish that status. So if the father were to say such a thing, einachinami, the father would be believed. That's a special gezeiras hakosov based on yakir. Yakir means he has the right to identify.
When did
The
that start?
When did what start? The believe. Well, it's in the Talmud itself. The Talmud itself it bases it on interpretation of the Torah. So, as far as we believe, as part of the oral Torah, it goes back all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's all the way back. Yeah.
The sperm impregnates the mother's, its wife's
Egg. Yeah.
and then that's transferred into the human's
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm gonna address that right now. That's what I'm up to. Meaning the following. Yeah. Okay. I will get to it in a minute. Yeah.
Is it better for the surrogate to be Jewish or not Jewish?
Yeah, I'll get to that too, because it all depends on the following situation. Now, again, it's very important. It's very, very, very important that when we talk about surrogacy, we differentiate between full surrogacy and gestational surrogacy, because halachically they pose different issues. Full surrogacy, which as I say is actually not so common today, but full surrogacy is halachically a much more simple situation to analyze. Because in full surrogacy, we know for sure who is the father, and we know for sure who is the mother. The father is the husband whose sperm fertilized the egg, and the mother is the woman who gave birth to the child, because she is both the mother who carried the baby and the mother whose egg was fertilized. So all of the big shilas, which I'll get to in a second, about who is the mother, are not relevant in full surrogacy, because we know who the mother is under those circumstances. And that's clearly where the Rabbanut's guideline would apply in that case. And that is, she has to be single, and she should not be a sister of husband-wife or a mother of husband-wife. Now, when you get to gestational surrogacy, you have, I'm sorry, and once again, and if the full surrogate is not Jewish, once again, it's pretty simple. The child is 100% a guy. He is born from a non-Jewish woman, and her egg was fertilized, and it's a davar pashut ma'od that a child that is born from a non-Jewish full surrogate 100% needs conversion. I would also add that according to halacha, the Jewish man is not his father halachically, because essentially he had a child from a non-Jewish woman, and when the child converts, he is not halachically related to his father. Now again, I always have to make this point, so there's no Urevu there for sure. I always make this point that I am not referring to emotional bonds. I mean, sometimes when Gerim hear these halachas, that your father is not your father, they may take it in a certain way that is not intended. I don't mean you don't love If a man was born, or a person, a child was born from a non-Jewish woman, and their father is Jewish, I don't mean to say you don't love your father. I don't mean to say you don't honor your father. You don't. Of course you do. I just mean in terms of the narrow halachic construct. Uh, it's not a paternal relationship. It's one of hakarat hatov, of gratitude and love. It's very similar to adoption. I mean, adoption too. You don't have the biological bonds, but the emotional bond is still there. Okay, so the case of full surrogacy is a fairly simple situation to analyze. Now, if you then ask, is it better to have a non-Jewish surrogate or a Jewish surrogate? So, based on Rav Moshe Feinstein's concern for secret incest of a brother marrying a sister, it might be better to have a guy. But in the case of surrogacy, I think that's less compelling because unlike sperm donors who are repeat donors, surrogates tend to be one-time people, meaning to say the fear that, one child will marry another child later because they both came from the same woman is not so likely because surrogates tend not to be repeat. It's hard enough to be a surrogate once. Unlike sperm donors, they don't do it multiple times. So Rav Moshe's concern about sperm donors, a brother marrying a sister, if it's a Jewish woman, and therefore you want a non-Jewish woman, I think maybe less compelling. I'm sorry, I don't mean non-Jewish, non-Jewish sperm. Rav Moshe's point of non-Jewish sperm wouldn't automatically translate into non-Jewish woman. But okay. All right, so that's the situation of surrogacy. Now, the only question we might ask about full surrogacy is the interesting question: is a woman allowed to be a full surrogate? Okay, if it's a non-Jewish woman, she'll do what she wants. But if you have a Jewish woman who wants to keep halacha, can a Jewish woman, halachically, be a surrogate? So the question is, well, why not? I mean, what avera is taking place by carrying a baby on behalf of somebody else? Once you factored out mamzer, and once we don't treat it like intercourse for purposes of premarital sex or whatever it would be. So Rav Moshe Tendler made the argument, and I'm not sure I don't think it's a compelling argument, but he actually said it's forbidden to be a surrogate because pregnancy and childbirth are halachically life-threatening conditions. Potentially people can die. But the Torah permits it for the purpose of raising a child. So his argument is, a woman is allowed to get pregnant only if she plans on raising the child, with her husband. If she's getting pregnant in order to give the baby away, he claims it is prohibited to put yourself in a makom sakana if it's not for the purpose of raising the child. I hear it, I understand, and surrogacy makes me uncomfortable as well, but I'm not sure if his logic is ironclad here, because I understand the idea, don't become pregnant unless you're going to bring it, unless you want to bring a child into the world, but who says you have to be the one that raises it? I mean, the other way around, we sometimes encourage parents under very difficult situations to place a child for adoption. We don't say can't get pregnant if you're going to give up the child for adoption. So going back to square one, therefore, if you were to ask, is it forbidden for a woman to volunteer as a surrogate? It's not clear that there's any prohibition. But again, as I say, I will mention that Rabbi Tendler, Zichrono Livracha, who was Rav Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law and an eminent Talmud Chacham in his own right, did take the position that surrogacy was in itself a forbidden status for a woman to be. Now, that's the full surrogate. Yeah. One second, yeah.
Question isn't answered. In other words, I was asking if a husband and wife arrange to have a wife.
I understand that. I didn't get there yet. I told you I was going to get to it. I will get to it. I will get to it. I mean, you have to let me. You have to let me control the timing of the year. I mean, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. I don't ignore questions. I mean, I will get to it. I'm sorry I was confusing. Yeah.
That a woman should not continuously put herself
That's correct. So that would be part of the same issue, that of putting herself through this, where it's not even for the purpose of her raising a child. That would be. Well, I mentioned several times for Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that says a woman is not obligated to go through any of these, even for her own children, but she's allowed to if she wants to. Most of the time, people want to. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Is there any restriction on the status of the surrogate mother being Jewish, whether she's married or whether she's a single mother?
Yeah, so I did mention that the Rabbinic's guidelines is that the surrogate must be a single woman, not a married woman, because otherwise the child might be considered to be a mamzer, born from an adultery. Well, no, as I say though, the Rabbinut splits the difference. They do not treat it as intercourse, and therefore she's allowed to marry a Kohen, but they're choshesh that the birth may be a mamzer. Okay, so now let me answer the question. Okay, really, I mean, okay. Let us talk about gestational surrogacy, which is a more complicated phenomenon. In gestational surrogacy, a husband's sperm fertilizes wife's egg in IVF typically, and then if there's a fertilized embryo, it is transferred to a third woman or a second woman. She might be Jewish, she might be non-Jewish, etc. So here we have a very, very fundamental halachic problem that turns on that has many ramifications, and that is, who is the halachic mother in that type of scenario? Because what's the issue? We know that Judaism, of course, is based on identity of mother, matrilineal descent. The question becomes, okay, in a full surrogacy, we know who the mother is. That's not a question. By gestational surrogacy, who is the mother? Is the mother the genetic mother whose egg was fertilized, 50% of whose chromosomes are in this baby? Or is the mother the gestational woman who carried the baby for 9 months of pregnancy? Now, this is going to be extremely important if, for example, the surrogate is not Jewish. Husband and wife are both Jewish. Surrogate is not Jewish. Husband's sperm fertilizes his wife's egg, but the baby was born from a non-Jewish body. If the halachic mother is the surrogate, the child would have to have a conversion. As a baby, there are procedures for converting babies and the like. If, on the other hand, the halachic mother is the genetic mother, the child would not need a conversion. So that's one nafkamina. One difference is, if the surrogate is not Jewish, do you need conversion? But there are other differences. Even if both are Jewish, the question is, which relatives? I mean, let's imagine the wife who gave her egg has natural children, and let's say the surrogate has natural children. So let's imagine a boy is born from a gestational surrogate. Could he marry the sister from the wife, or the sister from the surrogate? In other words, it all depends who the mother is, meaning to say, okay. This is a little tricky because there it may be usher anyway, because it may be a half-sister, meaning he certainly could not marry the siblings from the wife, because they at least would be half siblings from the father. That's true. But if halachically the surrogate is not his mother, then he has no halachic relationship to her children, because they don't share a father or a mother. So if maternity would be defined by the genetic mother, I'm just using an example of a boy, the boy, let's say, who's born from the surrogate, would, excuse me, would be allowed to marry the siblings of the surrogate, you see? Is that- no, the father is with the egg donor. The father is with the egg donor. Yeah. In other words, husband fertilized wife's egg, and the fertilized egg was carried by surrogate. If halachically the egg donor is the mother, then halachically the child born from the surrogate has no relationship at all to the other children of the surrogate. So he would be allowed to marry other children of the surrogate. Now, Masha'en came, if halachically the surrogate is the mother, then he would not be allowed to marry children of the mother because they would be half siblings from the same mother, nor could he marry children of the egg donor because even if the egg donor is not the mother, but they're half siblings from the father. You see? So this is the shot. Yeah, yeah. Well, DNA testing is not going to be relevant here because we know the facts. I know the DNA is going to be from the egg donor. I mean, I know that. The issue is not doing any testing. The issue is halachically, what is the criterion that will establish? I'll give you some proof from the Gemara in a moment. What are the criteria that establish halachic maternity? Is it the genetic contribution or is it the 9 months of gestation? I mean, DNA testing is not going to help you at all. I mean, you know that. I know if I do DNA testing, it'll be the egg donor that's whose DNA is going to come up. But the question is that kovea? What is more significant? Yeah.
I think usually there's a legal transaction between the surrogate.
A contract, yeah.
Saying, you're only the surrogate, you have no rights afterwards, and, there's a legal transaction.
Yes. But the question becomes, halachically, you can't change that. Meaning to say, we can sign all sorts of contracts. Who's going to have custody? Okay, I agree with you. We can have adoption procedures. We can have custody procedures. But halachically, that cannot erase. You cannot erase the halachic definition of who is a mother and who is a father. That's going to remain. If a person puts up their child for adoption at birth, they are still the halachic father and mother, even if they agreed for support and other purposes to relinquish it. So you are right that with respect to custody and support and who's going to be obligated to do this and that, they're going to have a contract. But in terms of conversion necessities, in terms of this non-Jewish surrogate, in terms of sibling and the like, there are going to be problems. Now, I do want to point out that the Rabbanut treats this gestational surrogacy as an unresolved halachic issue, and therefore you must be machmir on all sides of the question. Therefore, thank you. Therefore, the child born from a non-Jewish surrogate must undergo conversion. He will not be registered as a Jew unless there's a gior. And number two, the kid cannot marry siblings from either the egg donor or the surrogate because we treat either one of them as a mother. In other words, that's simply considering it as a safek. And as a safek, one must go lechumra. Now, that's the Rabbinet's position, which is simply saying we don't want to decide the question, so we're just going to be strict on it. But let me point out there's a very, very fascinating proof, although it's not really a proof because you don't bring proofs from Midrashim, that emerges from last week's Parsha. Amazing, amazing, amazing proof. And this is the story of Dinah. Remember last week's Parsha, we read about the daughter that Leah had, whose name was Dinah. Now, with all of the boys, all of the Shvatim, it always says, Vatahar, she conceived, and she gave birth. Vatahar, In the case of Dinah, it just says, V'yachar kach yalda es Dinah. She gave birth to Dinah. It does not say she conceived Dinah. Rashi brings the following teaching. When Leah was pregnant with the child who was eventually Dinah, originally she was carrying a boy. Now she already had 6 sons. This would have been her 7th son. And when Rachel was pregnant with who eventually was Yosef, Rachel was originally carrying a girl. Leah knew she was carrying a boy, and Rachel was carrying a girl with Ruach HaKodesh. She knew this. And here was the problem. There's only going to be 12 tribes. If Leah were to have one more, that would leave only one tribe for Dinah, one tribe for Rachel, which would have been Binyamin, and that would have made Rachel inferior to even the maidservants, each of whom had 2. Therefore, Rashi says, based on the Midrash, that Leah prayed that the boy she was carrying should be turned into a girl, and the girl that Rachel was carrying should be turned into a boy. So it's a miracle. The Gemara says it is a miracle because, as a general rule, the Gemara says that after 40 days from conception, you're not allowed to pray, I should have a boy or I should have a girl, because it's already been decided. And the Gemara asks, well, how could Leah have sex change or whatever it would be? Maisa nes, it was mamash a miracle. And that's why it doesn't say she conceived Dinah, because she didn't conceive Dinah, but she gave birth to Dinah. Now, according to Rashi's understanding of the Midrash, this was just a sex change, meaning there's no surrogacy here, meaning the girl in Leah's body became a boy, and the boy in Rachel's, the girl in Rachel's body became a girl, meaning there was no switcheroos here. It was simply a gender change. So that has nothing to do with surrogacy. But there's an alternative version of this Midrash that is preserved in Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. Now, a little bit of background here. Yonasan ben Uziel was considered to be the greatest of the disciples of Hillel, the greatest of the Talmidim of Hillel. And he was so great and so holy that when he would learn Torah, the angels would gather over his head, and their heavenly fire would burn any birds that flew over the learning. That's how kadosh he was. Hasidim like to say that you can gauge by your reaction to this story, are you a chassid or a misnaged? Because what would a chassid do, how would a chassid react when he hears such a story? He would say, look at the holiness of a tzaddik, where a tzaddik could be greater than the angels. The angels in heaven are jealous of the tzaddik, right? Like Chabad likes to say, this is the message of the game of chess, that the lowly pawn, which is the most inferior of all the chess pieces, is the only one that can grow and become a queen, right? That's the human being. We're much lower than the angels, but we can change and we can grow, and that's why the angels are jealous of Yonasan ben Uziel. That's a Hasidic response to the story. A Litvak responds to the story by who has to pay for the birds. Let's say the birds belong to somebody. Meaning, right, a Litvak, as Rav Soloveitchik writes, is ish halacha. Everything has to be analyzed halachically. Is Yonasan ben Uziel liable for supernatural damages, right? So that's a Litvak versus a chassid. You may know Yonasan ben Uziel is buried near Tzfat in a very deep, deep valley called Amuka. I haven't been there for a number of years. I think they probably fixed it up a little bit, but when I was in Amuka, it was dark, dark, dark. There were literally no lights at all, other than your headlights of a bus. And I have to admit, Amuka, it was the first time I understood Hashem's promise to Avram that your children will be kekaychvei hashamayim. No, go outside tonight. Look up at the sky. How many stars do you see? You see 10 stars. Like, what's the big deal? Stars of the heaven. But go to a place totally dark. That's a deep valley. There are like millions of stars up there. There really are a whole bunch of stuff out there. So I understood for the first time. Now, Amuka, it is said Yonasan ben Uziel never got married. I'm not sure why, but because he knew the pain of being single, it's a place that's very misugal for shidduchim. You go there to pray for shidduchim, and what often happens is young ladies inadvertently leave their sitters there with their names, addresses, phone number, and email, conveniently. And young men who want to be Makayim, the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda when they get back to the States, will try to do this mitzvah. And Baruch Hashem, in the merit of Hashavas Aveda, many, many shidduchim are done. Now, if you look at a Mikros Gedolos, you will notice that we have Targum Onkelos, which is an Aramaic translation. And then we have Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, which is also an Aramaic translation. But they're very, very different. They're both authoritative. Targum Onkelos is very much a literal translation, although an in-depth analysis will reveal all sorts of things, but on the surface, it's just word for word for word. Targum Yonasan ben Uziel brings in many, many midrashim, and in fact, because he was a Tana, he himself, now that you don't have to say, oh, where did he get it from? I mean, he's a medrash. Targum Yonasan itself is a midrashic source. Now, he brings the same story that Rashi brings. This is fascinating. But he brings it in a very, very different way. Once again, we start off the same way. Leah was carrying a boy, and Rachel was carrying a girl. And Leah was afraid that if she has a boy, same thing as Rashi so far, that's only going to leave one tribe for Rachel, so she'll be humiliated. So Leah prayed. So far, Rashi and Targum Yonasan are walking on the same road. Targum Yonasan then says the following. As a result of Leah's prayer, the embryos in the bodies were switched. Not that the embryo changed gender. Rather, the boy in Leah's body, Hashem put into Rachel's body, and that was Yosef. And the girl that was in Rachel's body was put into Leah's body. So now it turns out that genetically, Dinah was Rachel's child. And it turns out that genetically, Yosef was Leah's child. In effect, each one became the gestational surrogate of the other. And since B'chol HaTorah Kula, Dinah is always described as Leah's daughter, even though, according to Targum Yonasan, genetically she was Rachel's daughter. And Yosef is always described as the child of Rachel, even though genetically he was Leah's son. This seems to be a proof that the surrogate is the mother, and that overrides the egg donor. Now, again, I want to point out two things. Number one, it's essential that you understand that this is only a proof according to Targum Yonasan's version of the story. It is not a proof according to Rashi's version of the story, because according to Rashi, Dinah was the genetic child of Leah. She just transitioned from a boy to a girl. And Yosef was the genetic child of Rachel. He just transitioned from a girl to a boy. So it has nothing to do with surrogacy according to Rashi's understanding of the Midrash. It is only a proof according to Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, which means it's not a proof because who says that that's the version of the story? Also, as Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach points out, generally speaking, we are not able to bring halachic proofs to Midrashim. Midrashim have symbolic value. They're not always meant to be taken literally. So it's fascinating. It's just a fascinating little point that you can see from this story, something that has an implication for surrogacy, but this is not a halachic proof, and therefore the Rabbanut's position is very defensible, that we have to treat this as an unresolved halachic question. Now, Rav Yashiv, I'm told, I didn't see the second thing in writing, but I know that Rav Yashiv originally took the position that it was not a suffix. He considered gestation and birth to be the most important thing, which is supported by this Targum Yonasan. But somebody told me, and this I had not seen, that Rav Yashiv changed his mind. He was choser before he died, and he wanted to allocate maternity based on genetic contribution. Now, if we were writing on a blank slate, if we were just asking ourselves logically, what should be the most important determinant? In many ways, a very strong logical argument could be made for the egg donor, because after all, the genome of the person, the characteristics of the person, the 50% from father, 50% from mother, are coming from the egg donor, right? Those are the characteristics that form the identity. So that would argue in favor of egg donor. I shouldn't call her an egg donor. She's going to raise the child, but no, the one who contributed the egg contributor, we'll say, genetic mother. But the counter argument is spiritually based on the well-known Gemara in Maseches Nida, that before a child is born, an angel, a malach, is teaching the child the whole Torah in the womb. And when the child is about to be born, the child takes an oath to be righteous and not to be a rasha. He actually promises, God takes an oath, which maybe we break, but at least the oath is made. And then the child is struck on the lip here, above the lip, and forgets all the Torah. People ask the question, what is the purpose of teaching a child Torah if he's going to forget it and comes in not knowing anything? The short answer is, it imprints spiritual truth in his neshama. So even though he forgets the information, it defines his essence. That's why people sometimes say, people who are choser b'tshuva, sometimes say that when they encounter Torah, there is a deja vu sensation. It's as if I'm somehow connected to this before. Yeah, it goes all the way back. Interestingly, how does this work with non-Jews who convert? People who were born from non-Jews? Again, it's a little tricky. There are two different ways Kabbalah explains it, so we're not sure. One is that since Hashem knew ahead of time this person would be converting, so he sent the angel even to the non-Jewish mother, and the person got his lesson. Others say that immersion in the mikveh is a new birth, and therefore you get a crash course, so to speak. You don't have 9 months. Well, of course, you prepare for the conversion, but you go in the mikveh, the malach gives you like instantaneous knowledge. But the point I'm making is, if there is something significant in the spiritual development of the neshama that occurs during gestation, that may be a basis for assigning maternity to the birth mother. So there are svaros, there are arguments, mikan u'mikan. That's why Rabbi Yashiv himself went back and forth on it. The Rabbanut treats this as an unresolved question. Again, it is relevant to conversion. It is relevant to siblings. Inheritance, maybe not so much. I'll tell you why. Because inheritance of the father's estate does not depend on the mother. So in terms of getting from the father, that would be not a problem. But it would make a difference. If the mother at some point, either mother, is widowed, and when she dies, her property would go to her children. So once again, you'd have a shaila. Does the kid born from a surrogate inherit from the surrogate or inherit from the egg donor? So there are many, many questions. Now, I do want to point out that, sorry, back. Okay.
Who is the birth mother, though? You see, you go to Choma, I understand that both sides would be, but if you were to go to Basin, you go to Shlomo HaMelech, and the two women, who would be the birth mother? Who would be the mother?
Well, all I can tell you is, obviously, if we knew what Shlomo HaMelech would say, we wouldn't say it's an unresolved question, meaning it's precisely because we don't know what Shlomo HaMelech would say that we have to treat it as a suffix. Yeah, in the back. Yeah.
the children, even though she was both genetic, the matron was both genetic and not surrogate, but both was genetic, the children were still deemed to be that of, let's say, Yaakov and Rachel, or whatever, or it was Yaakov and Leah. So in the Torah, they somehow seem to, even though Gilgal is the birth mother, they somehow seem to still say that Rachel is the mother, or Leah is the mother. So that kind of refutes some of this. And my next question, I have two, is if you have a conversion, the DNA is the father, and let's say the mother, DNA is the mother, but the child has to convert because it's a non-Jewish surrogate. If the father was a Kohen, what happens to that DNA kahuna to that child?
Yes, so let me answer the second question first. Unfortunately, the child is not a Kohen, even though he has the DNA of a Kohen, because he was born from a non-Jewish woman, and if that is his mother, he has to convert. That is why, by the way, the DNA test for kahuna can only establish you're not a Kohen. It cannot establish you are a Kohen, meaning it may very well be that if a person does not have the DNA marker for kahuna, that may prove he's not a Kohen. But the presence of the DNA does not prove he is a Kohen, because exactly in this example would be an example of having the male DNA and losing it. So that's correct. Now, with respect to your first question, it is very, very true that writings on surrogacy have pointed to the Bilhah and Zilpah. Remember when Rachel gives her maidservant Bilhah to Yaakov, she says, I will have children through her. I will be built up through her. Now, there, you're not the, Rachel was not the genetic mother. She was not the birth mother. So the truth of the matter is, I would say that surrogacy is not the right category to apply there. I would apply adoption. Essentially, we look at it, the notion that emotionally, there could be an adoptive bond when you take the primary responsibility for raising the child, because there's no question that halachically the shvachot are the mothers of those, but apparently Rachel and Leah took primary responsibility for raising those children, and that's what Chazal say. Chazal say, "Kol megadel yasom v'yatoma b'toch beiso." If you raise orphans in your home, it is spiritually as if you gave birth to them, although halachically that does not create maternity. Yeah.
Judgment regarding the names of the child. If the mother is DNA is of the mother, and the child takes the name Yaakov ben the mother.
In other words, if you're praying for a sick person, like he's a chola, which mother do you use? Yeah, it's a very good question. If we say we're uncertain who the mother is, so it's very relevant for tefillah, right? When we pray for a chola, we use the mother's name. Which mother do you use? The truth is, frankly, you can use two mothers. You can basically say, now publicly, I'm not sure, that may embarrass somebody, but technically it would be, Yaakov ben Rachel ben Leah, whatever the names are. There would be that. I will say though, bottom line though, even though the Rabbinit treats it as a safek, I actually believe that most poskim do consider the surrogate to be the mother by virtue of gestation. So if that's the case, that's where you would probably go with the name. Yeah. Oh, of course he does. Sure. No, I mean, Rav Steinberg, Rav Avram Steinberg, a wonderful, wonderful person, a big Talmud Chacham and a great physician, has a whole encyclopedia, a multi-volume encyclopedia in Hebrew and in English on Jewish medical ethics. But, the nature of an encyclopedia is he'll give you all the different opinions, and he will not tell you what the bottom line halacha is. So I don't know what he personally would paskin, but from his writing, it's more or less the stuff I'm telling you. Yeah.
Well, I don't understand why the measures for some people are precedent over what's written in the Torah.
Well, you say the Midrash. Well.
In other words, whether it's born from Rachel and Leah,
Well, remember, the Medrash here is based on a very, the question is why do some people think the Medrash takes precedence over what's written in the Torah, right? That's the question. So you have to understand that the Medrash is based on a very close reading of the Torah. Because remember the Medrash's point. By every single one of the tribes, it always says she conceived and gave birth. By Dinah, the word vatahar, conceived, is left out. So the Medrash is interpreting, now you may find it far-fetched, but the Medrash is basing its conclusion on a linguistic analysis of the text of the Torah. It isn't just a freestanding Baba Maisa that it's bringing in. It's a very, very close reading of the text. And in fact, we often don't understand the textual basis of Medrash. So we look at it as fanciful and artificial. But in truth, and this could be a whole big course in and of itself, in truth, Medrash is actually extremely close reading of the subtleties of words, repetitions, redundancies, inconsistencies. Why does this word come here and not there? And that's the basis of Chazal's tradition. Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned two concepts of how a ger could receive the imprint of Torah.
Yeah.
But I thought before that you said there were three. Am I wrong?
Did I say? No, I think I said two. But the two are that ahead of time, he gets it even as a non-Jew, and the other is the mikvah. Now that also goes to a related question, which is kind of almost the same question, and that is a ger born with a Jewish soul, or does a ger acquire a Jewish soul upon the conversion? The truth is that's just another way of describing the two mahalchim. Many people who become gerim often describe a phenomenon that they felt Jewish at a very, very young age. They felt Jewish at a very, very young age. And I'm talking about people who grew up in places even where there weren't any Jews at all. Like somebody from, South Dakota says, ever since I was 4 years old. Say again? Yeah. Yeah. So ever since I was 4 years old, in fact, they didn't even know it was a Jewish thing. You might see something, I'm not saying every case, you might see something like, whenever it was Saturday, I just felt I couldn't turn on the television. They didn't even know there was Shabbos. They didn't even know what it was connected to. But there was something in them that they just couldn't do certain things on Saturday. So that would suggest, anecdotally at least, that there is this pre-existing Jewish soul that was there all the way from the beginning. Somehow it got in a different body. How that happened is an interesting question. Others say that they look at conversion as a new creation, meaning, you didn't have a Jewish soul, you go to the mikveh, you have a Jewish soul. By the way, that happens only when you come out of the mikveh. It's interesting. Mikveh does not do its job. It's true even for nida. You're not tahor when you go into the mikveh. You are tahor when you come out of the mikveh. So theoretically, as long as you're underwater, nothing's happened yet. The transition occurs when one hair is above water. Baruch Hashem, you've emerged from the womb, and now you are reborn. It's important to know that the tahira of a mikveh is not in the water. It is, so for example, I don't know, if husband would jump, his wife, okay, whatever. His wife is in the mikveh, she's under, and he's so happy to see her, he jumps into the water to give her a hug, and they're both underwater. Isser Deraisa of Nida. She's still a Nida until she comes out of the water. Yeah. Yeah.
Because the husband and the wife, let's say she doesn't have, she can't carry for whatever health reason, right? And it's an IVF baby implanted into the surrogate. The intent is for that baby to belong to the DNA of mother and father. So, for the child born, that child may not even know they were born of a surrogate. That child, if they do find, or the parents may be embarrassed, they might have done it in another place.
Yeah.
It's a very private thing, it's not a public thing. So how is it that this surrogate, this is such a private matter, and the DNA is clearly
Yeah.
So, and it's private, how is it that the surrogate out of their own self, let's say the shiksa from South Dakota, whatever, is all of a sudden the mother of this child? They moved to Yerushalayim, let's say.
Yeah.
And now the child they have to daven, they're gonna name a shiksa from South Dakota?
Well, once again, this is going to even be worse if you consider an egg donor who might be a mother. I mean, let me turn it around a little bit. So you're arguing it's not fair that the surrogate should be the mother. Well, who should be the mother? Therefore, the egg donor. So now let's consider a reverse situation, which I'm going to address next week. Let's consider a situation where a husband and wife, the wife is going to carry the baby, but there was an egg donor. Now, is it more logical that the egg donor over there in South Dakota? I think there's a stronger case for the surrogate than for the egg donor, right? So you can't have it both ways. Meaning, because if you're going to give the wife motherhood because she is the egg donor, then you're going to give the anonymous egg donor motherhood because she's the egg donor. It's the same issue. So you're arguing that intent should change it. I understand, but halachically that may. I
I think also the embarrassment, why does the child need to know that they came forth from a shiksa that may,
yeah.
no, I'm not making.
No, I do understand. Yeah.
Down the line, there's a lot of social issues.
No, there's no. I have to stop, but there's no question. You're raising very, very legitimate points, and this has to be considered. The question is, how relevant are they halachically? That's going to be the question. Meaning, there is a problem. I'm not denying that, but we may be stuck. Sometimes we have to work with the evils that we're confronted with. Anyway, we'll continue next week. Have a good week, everybody. Thank you.